The afternoon was blistering hot. Scorching rays of sunlight bounced off the asphalt road, rippling like the rising of suffocating steam. The community workers had returned again to stand in front of Carter's neighbor's house, complaining incessantly about the glass shards scattered across the ground and the black ink blotch on the wall. Just off work, Carter walked out from his private garage. As soon as the two men saw him, they came up to ask, "Mr. James, do you know when will Mr. Zack be back?" Carter politely shook his head. He didn't know either. In this clean and tidy community, all the residents made a conscious effort to maintain a pleasant community environment. People would regularly mow their lawns and trim their gardens, even voluntarily washing the pavements outside their yard on occasion. In such a harmonious environment, the sight of such a disorderly house, with its uncleared glass across the ground and unwashed ink on the wall, was incredibly jarring. The community workers would practically come by once a day, but they were never able to bump into the Mr. Zack that they yearned for. Carter couldn't remember when it started, but the man across the street never appeared again. It seemed to be from 2 days before, or was it 3? In any case, after the incident that night, as far as Carter was aware of, that man had returned only once. Well, it was possible that he had moved to a relative's or friend's house because he didn't feel safe in this environment. Carter didn't find it strange, merely that he was unavoidably a little bored and unused to days without anyone to spy on. However, the bright side was that he had moved here because he wanted to curb his bad habit of voyeurism. Now that his only opportunity to peek in was gone, it was rather convenient for him to keep his wandering eyes to himself. There were 3 express delivery parcels stacked together outside Carter's iron fence. He brought the 3 parcels in and used a small knife to cut them open. They were the 3 items that he had purchased or sent for repairs recently. The first contained a bottle of ink. Carter had the habit of practicing his handwriting. To him, ink was an essential item that he regularly used. The next parcel contained a bottle of cologne. While this wasn't an essential item, there were a couple of days every year that he would use it, thus he bought one to prevent being caught unprepared should the occasion arise. The brand was the same as the one he smashed that night. Carter had parted with his ex-boyfriend on good terms without any emotional entanglements. Having used this brand of cologne for a long time, he didn't intend to go out of his way to change to another one. And the last parcel contained the antique mechanical watch that Carter had failed to fix. Even if the model was already several decades outdated, the manufacturer offered a lifetime warranty. By the rules of the prison staff couldn't bring their phones into the prison area. Carter was accustomed to using this old watch to tell the time. These days without a watch, he had unconsciously glanced towards his empty wrist ever so often. The items that he lacked and broke were restored to their original places. In the end, the community workers also cleaned the glass shards from the opposite yard. Only, his neighbors seemed to have vanished into thin air, and the gaping bedroom window was never fixed. When gazing over from his house, Carter felt oddly bereft. "Morning, Officer James." It was another ordinary working day about a month after that. In the bright and spacious locker room, his colleague, who had just gotten off the night shift, was yawning as he greeted Carter. Carter worked as the prison librarian. It was considered a civilian post, not a guard in the strictest sense of the word. However, due to him wearing the same guard uniform as his colleagues, everyone tacitly put him among the ranks of the prison guards. "Morning," Carter replied, taking off his white short-sleeved shirt and removing the dark gray uniform shirt from his locker. At Southside Prison, there were 3 types of uniforms, namely summer wear, winter wear, and formal wear. The summer and winter set only differed in how thick the fabric was and how long the sleeves were. On the other hand, the formal set were worn for more solemn occasions. The uniforms that the prison staff received only had one size and was not differentiated into S, M, L sizes. But due to Carter being on the more slender side, while the shoulder region was a good fit, the fitting for the area beneath the ribs at the waist was conversely too wide. He took it to a tailor shop outside his community to be altered. The shirt now fit snugly to his waistline. He buttoned his shirt all the way down. His lean figure was thereupon hidden behind the cloth. The stiff collar was meticulously straightened, and an atypical prison guard appeared in the mirror. Next to his strapping colleagues, Carter was like a frail scholar. Although he was 1.8 meters tall, he gave off the impression that he could be taken down with one hit. The main reason for this was that he had a clean and delicate appearance, letting others unconsciously assume that he was easy to bully. Were his skin tone more tan, at the very least his features wouldn't look as dainty. Unfortunately, not only did he have fair skin, his lips were even cherry pink. It wasn't any surprise that people would think that he was a pushover. Back when he had first started working at Southside Prison, the warden had given him a well-intentioned warning that he should watch out for his personal safety. Carter naturally understood where the warden was coming from. Rather than his personal safety, it mayhap would be better to call it the safety of his pucker. But more than half a year passed without incident. After changing into his guard uniform, Carter went to collect from the mailroom the letters addressed to the inmates, then spent half an hour checking the contents of each of them. Carter liked this task a lot as it was a justified form of voyeurism. He didn't have to hold himself back, nor did he have to feel any kind of psychological burden. More accurately, this couldn't even be termed voyeurism, but part of his job description. Most of the inmates who wrote letters were sincere and remorseful, concerned about their family, and hopeful for the future. Carter believed that in this world there was no absolute evil, and these letters offered him a glimpse into the wider picture. After delivering the mail to the cell blocks and collecting the reply letters to be sent out again, Carter's had essentially completed his tasks for the morning. In all honesty, it was almost unbelievable how easy this job was, along with its generous employee benefits. It was only that they had to interact with convicts which deterred many people from seeking employment here. Carter's work area was located in a quiet corner of the prison library near the windows. A quadrant-shaped office desk partitioned a fan-like space, and the area inside was only enough to accommodate the working space for one person. Apart from Carter, pretty much no one else would enter this area. Over time, it became his personal domain. He turned on the computer to catch up on the news. The ongoing financial crime case which shook the country a while back had reached a verdict. Mr. Zack from the investment management firm was sentenced to serve a year in prison, fined $300 million, and was taken into custody in court. The trial was held in a local courthouse. From the looks of it, they would be expecting fresh faces in prison soon. Absently, he glanced out of the window, then took out a book, Prison Rules, from the drawer. Everyone who came into the prison to serve out their sentence would have to go through education and reformation, and their first lesson was precisely the responsibility of Carter, the idler. It was already afternoon by the time this new batch of inmates went through all the formalities. The block supervisor appeared outside the library door, using a file dossier to knock on the door, telling Carter, "I've brought them over." Carter made a sound of acknowledgement. He clamped the slim book under his arm and took the dossier of the convict's information from the other person. Then he started walking to a small meeting room. There were a total of 3 convicted felons who came in today. As Carter went down the stairs, he flipped through their files. The file on top was for a telecom fraudster who had swindled a wealthy woman of her money. The next was a thug who had crippled someone in a brawl, such that the victim was incapacitated for life. Then the last should be that sensational. His steps stopped abruptly at the door to the meeting room. Carter had one hand on the door that he had pushed open, staring in disbelief at the information in this file. Melvin, male, 27 years old, 1.86 meters tall. It wasn't this banal information that had shocked Carter. Truly, what had shaken him to the core was the familiar face in the profile shot. The messy hair that reached the ears was cut significantly shorter, the contrast causing those deeply set facial features to appear even more unyielding. No matter how Carter looked at it, this face was a spitting image of the face he was used to seeing through the monocular lens. In other words, the hedge fund manager Mr. Zack mentioned in the news was actually the neighbor Mr. Zack who lived across the street from him? Carter was shocked to the point of absurdity. It was no wonder that that man had disappeared for such a long time without even bothering to repair his window. As it turned out, he had been locked up in a detention house. The 3 men in the meeting room were staring at Carter, who was frozen at the door. He swiftly recovered, then took a deep breath and looked away from the dossier. he calmly met the gazes of the three men. Carter had to confess, when his eyes met Melvin's, his heart still trembled. This was the guilty conscience of a voyeur, a psychological tremor that shook him from inside out. Never before had he looked Melvin straight in the eye. The jet-black eyes were sharp, vigilant, and fathomless, reminding Carter almost immediately of a seasoned hunter. Fate often played jokes like this. He was the person that Carter was more than eager to avoid, yet he appeared before his eyes in this manner without the slightest warning. He really didn't have any surplus time to remain shocked, because he could feel Melvin quietly studying him, studying his features, studying his uniform, studying the book clamped under his arm. Most convicts could be likened to tigers. If you tried to turn tail and flee, you would only be regarded as prey and meet certain death. Whereas if you calmly sent a deterrent with your gaze, it would be possible to dissuade the tiger from its hunt, gaining a slim chance of survival. Carter was well aware of this. He lengthened his strides again, walking in his Dr. Martens boots up to the meeting table, and slapped the dossier down on it. Lifting his chin slightly, he coolly looked down at the three men in front of him, and he said, "Good afternoon to you all. I'm your corrections officer, Carter." Right as Carter finished speaking, the nearest seated fraudster started to toady up to him, greeting, "Afternoon, sir." "Afternoon." With the way that he said it, he was just short of offering up a pack of smokes. In prison, a portion of the inmates would ingratiate themselves with the guards. The fraudster before him was obviously a textbook example. Carter had no personal opinion about such behavior. He would do favors or make things easy for a few inmates from time to time, but his criteria for that wasn't based on whether the other had sucked up to him, but based on his own unique standard for judging good and evil. Open up the prison rulebook in front of you. Carter moved back to the whiteboard, turning over to take a marker and writing on the board in striking letters, "Obey the officers." Contrary to his soft and delicate appearance, Carter's handwriting was bold and vigorous, his strokes beautifully written, causing the words to appear even more imposing. But only Carter knew how much effort it was taking him to maintain a calm facade. That guy named Melvin didn't open his book. His two hands remained perched on his legs, his gaze chasing after and never deviating from Carter's face. On the night that he was almost exposed, Carter had felt this gaze before, and back then he had managed to hide behind the curtains in time. However, the situation now didn't allow him to evade again. 2017. Carter swept a gaze over the number on Melvin's prison uniform. "I asked you to open the book in front of you." The two men held in a deadlock for a split second that seemed stretched on for an age before Melvin finally spoke, not moving a finger. "You read, I'll listen." It was a flat, even tone, his attitude neither servile nor overbearing, at a pitch slightly deeper than what Carter had expected. Here was the second classic type of inmate, who would place themselves on equal standing as the prison guards. There were two extremities that those tended to fall into. Either they were reasonable and genial, never stirring trouble, else extremely dangerous and once offended, became wildly unpredictable. Carter was inclined to categorize Melvin in the latter. He averted his gaze, using the marker to tap the whiteboard, continuing, "There are 3 chances in life to receive education. First, from your family. Second, from schooling. If these 2 chances weren't able to teach you the right path, that's fine. You still have your third chance, prison." Most people only had a vague concept of good and evil. They knew what they could and couldn't do, but there was also a murky gray area in between. But Carter had a perfectly cohesive concept of good and evil. Just like how he spied on others without authorization, he should do some good deeds accordingly to recompense for it. If a convicted felon who had committed a crime didn't show any intention to redress, then he would classify them as wicked. In a nutshell, the attitude that Carter showed the bad eggs was very discourteous. "Sir." The thug who hadn't said anything until now suddenly pointed to a line in his book. "Help me take a look." "What does this mean?" Faint surprise flashed in Carter's eyes. He walked over to him, tilting his head to read what the thug pointed at, only to see that 4 words were written there plain as day. "Insult the prison guards." Another guy with nothing better to do than to make trouble. Before Carter could move his gaze away, he felt a hand touch his ass. This was wrong. In a lesson from a curriculum aimed to reform character, something so vulgar shouldn't be the focus of everyone's attention. Carter turned his head marginally, looking apathetically at the hand behind him. He deftly unhooked the baton from his waist. Bang! It pounded into the thug's lower arm. The thug cussed in pain, his body instinctively hunching towards where he was hit. Carter used the baton to jab the thug's forehead, stopping him and forcing him to sit up straight, coldly saying, "Do you think that this is a detention house?" The detention house was a temporary lockup for felons. As such, they were laxer with discipline there. Carter had looked through this thug's file earlier and knew that he was a first-timer in prison, so he chose to use the detention house to draw a comparison instead of directly asking if he wanted solitary confinement. This was the third classic type of inmate. Those discontent in the face of discipline, always making trouble for the guards and repeatedly tap dancing across the line. However, this type was also the easiest to deal with. If they didn't listen, simply place them in confinement. Keep them holed up until they relent. "You got it, boss." The thug raised both hands in surrender. "Carry on." The reason that Carter could go the better part of the year without incident wasn't that the inmates were being charitable, but that it wasn't a wise idea to provoke him in the first place. He indifferently swept a gaze over the other two before turning back to the board, reading aloud the contents of the book.